Well, I don't think Sappho thought much about rust. This is called These Shoelaces. We were living in Spain, bending down to tie my son's shoelace where he sits in his stroller in a bar in Spain. I see below me a jumble of geologic layers and rivers of time. There are the crossbars holding the miniature and mystical cities. There is my own tweed sleeve, steel-toed shoes going back to freight-loading days. And there is this little man standing up, drunk with enthusiasm for a sick world. When I went to work at the LaSalle Street station in Chicago as a freight loader with these steel-toed shoes, one of the men said, "How do you like being a donkey?" Because we had to pull these carts and stuff like that. This is the 4th of July. Those war monuments in Australia, by the way, are for World War I. And school children, even in the 2nd and 3rd grade, still write letters to the fallen of World War I, because Gallipoli means more to them than World War II. So they kind of skip all the other wars. But this one is World War II. The 4th of July, my uncle, Great Norman, whose leg was full of the finest German steel, broke 3 chairs and 1 table when the kids set off firecrackers on July 4th, 1946, just after apple pie. And this is just one poem about India. We lived in India for a year, and it was a very powerful experience. I don't think I've gotten over India, and some of my closest relationships are with friends from India. In fact, I have an Indian son-in-law now, so that's family. This is called A Human Donkey. And as I say, since you are writers, and we still in a way having a workshop, I'll mention how I wrote this poem, just, you know, not to say it's anything of a poem, gong, but I was waiting to buy an airline ticket in Indian Airways office, airlines. And you have to wait in India 2 or 3 hours to get anything done. It's probably changed in the last 10 years because they have computers now, but at that time, a clerk had to write out every airline seat on a little chart. So it took some time. So I thought, rather than sit here and be bored, I'll write a poem. I didn't have a thought in my head. And so I looked out the window and this is what I saw. The boy who tugs that cart along is 10 perhaps, a human donkey put out to work. His bare feet pad on the hot tar of India. Great sweat drops roll off his brow. He's got a load of rolled canvas, the kind we've seen staked to corral a crowd eager to see a film, or used for walls of privacy at weddings. This canvas is strong as ship sail, with bright swastikas appearing in every panel for good omen. It's heavy, too, as that boy's effort shows. He leans forward as if into the wind and is nearly tipped off the ground when he takes that awkward turn that will take him away from me, past an angled concrete delta, under giant billboard lovers who can speak only in Hindi. They almost kiss, yet manage well to see out over the crowd of rickshaws. Smoke from the peanut stand obscures him now. He disappears in haze, a boy put out to labor, flagged with his blue bandana, tugging the flatbed cart that's set upon a truck's sheared-off axle between 2 tread-worn tires at least 20 years older than this boy who's been put out to work in India. Well, I think I'll read you a poem I've never read in public before. It's called The 100-Year-Old Scotch in Rajasthan. And as you might perceive from this poem, I used to have a drinking problem. Well, you might not conclude that. You make your own conclusion. When I drank the 100-year-old Scotch, we were sitting at a long table on a terrace and were much admired, the turbaned Rajputs and I, by the villagers gazing over the waist-high walls. We were well served and expansive, having eaten our fill more than once, and already paraded through the mud streets to the joyous accompaniment of everyone who could move, whether on crutches or carried an arm, and the music was made by whatever drum they could play or tin horn. Somehow the noise managed its message medieval. I was proud, of course, to be for once with the winners, the aristocrats. It must have been clear to all that I was the honored foreigner, and yet I was aware that it was not, so to speak, personal. Any foreigner would do. Simply being there made me a god. Well into evening, the bearers kept filling my cup, and when we moved on to the castle for dinner on a turreted roof, sitting in great easy chairs as Arab sheikhs do in movies, the food was hot with spices, so I had to drink more and more, there being no water save what was hauled from the step well. They walk in it, bathe in it, drink it. And I had already seen them bathing there, stepping down to the square pool and having a good splash, washing their hair as well as their bodies, then drinking from cupped hands. None of that stuff for me, not for a Westerner. So I kept drinking the pleasant, amber-colored Scotch and asking of one beaming host after another if this was not indeed the 100-year-old Scotch, and was assured again and again I was in effect drinking pure gold, liquefied. Dawn found me walking out under palms through the fields, for all India as a toilet has been well and accurately said. The man at my side on a similar quest, a Rajput aristocrat with great mustaches and bronze skin, said, "Saab, we are so happy you are alive this morning." Now maybe that's where the poem should end, but I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of it. "We thought you would surely be dead. I had one hell of a headache and I trembled, but the main thing was that I needed a place in the fields to squat. Others were already busy at it, spread out, each with a little bucket set beside him, water for washing. 'What do you mean?' I asked. 'That 100-year-old Scotch was terrific, but I drank more than I should.' Headache was not all that I throbbed from, and the man laughed like a demon of sorts. He stopped in the sun rising, gilding the fields. Then he laughed wildly, almost in hysterics. 100-year-old Scotch, Saab. That was only our first drink. The rest was from here in the village. They used the old car radiators for distillers. Already this year, 6 die in this village alone. The lead in those car parts, it is poison, Saab." "But why?" I asked him, almost in tears, not sure now I'd live to eat breakfast, or until noon, or even until I managed to squat in the field. "Why did that bearer keep serving?" "Oh, Saab," the Rajput explained, "you liked it a lot. We Rajputs could see that, and we remarked to each other how happy you were. That bearer, he wished to be nice." "Nice?" I yelled, knowing maybe I'd die from it. "Oh yes," he said, "for that is our custom. We must always be nice." I was not well enough to continue our discourse, so I staggered on till a few riverside rushes gave me the chance to touch Mother Earth and deposit half or more of my body. Then some of my tears, while much of me died there, came to know what the phrase meant, 100 years of solitude. Which I then suffered within 1 square yard of Indian earth, and yet I recall it gleaming like gold, the first glass of that 100-year-old Scotch in Rajasthan, and how those eyes over the wall admired and envied me for drinking it, holding the glass up for another, and another, and another. I really did think I was going to die from that. I'll read just a few poems from Sam's book, Poems for My Son. Many of them were written while he was alive, and I just put them together. And some are working through the grief, which never ends, as you know. The Temple at Paestum. Son, forgive me if, for a moment when we saw the temple at Paestum on the sea, I thought the steps worn on that stone had been by your ancient feet which ran before me. You know, somebody asked the guru, what's the secret of happiness? And he said, grandfather die, father die, son die. The man said, that doesn't sound very happy. And the guru said, would you have it in any other order? And this is a brief song. There will come a day when you would have lived your life all the way through, mine long gone, and peace will descend then, such a great peace, like a breath, moving those pines, moving even the stone, and then I can let go. And this is the question. How long should I mourn? Let me ask you, my son, how long would you wish it? Do you want it to go on? Is there anything to be gained for either of us, for both of us? Are you so far away now that you're no more than a wish? The one I had on my mind before you fulfilled it came quite early one morning when mist was on fields and we had slept there waiting in a tent for you, yet rushed into the town as if a boy like you could not have appeared out of the fields, blue mists, not far from the ocean. And this is a poem that sort of interfaces with the India books. It's called Bhopal, and I can never quite get over how we split our own sufferings from those of others. You know, in the Bhagavad Gita, they say, the most amazing thing is that every man understands how the other man can die. And someone said, the only reason we can have war is that every man or every young man can be convinced that it is quite possible that the man at his side, on either side of him, may be killed in battle. So this is Bhopal with an epigraph from Clough, who's no longer read. I've often wondered how it is at times good people do what are as bad as crimes. And this is a sonnet. Eyes open, glazed like isinglass, the fire behind gone out. This child of Bhopal lies in his shallow grave of cinders. No time for weeping, as when we lost our son Sam, and stood, hands joined, to wish him well in some life beyond. In fact, he might have gone on to Bhopal, just in time to die again at just 3 months. Not likely, but who knows? One thing that's certain, though, is this. Third world or one beyond, they're all our children now, though born by millions in brown arms and black, and not much mourned by those who think their own are wonders, others somehow less, and thus I'll say goodbye to this son too, and yours. I think we've all been doing that to that Oklahoma child, the picture that's become so famous in the last couple of weeks. I guess these fancy deconstructionists use the term icon. That will become an icon for our year here. This is another trick of the mind, and actually this poem is based on something that's a serious suggestion from a grief book I was reading. Out of a book, a little trick. Instead of the picture and much longing for that lost face, place yourself within the frame. You are back together again, if only in the past or in the dream, or this gilded picture in mind. But it is no longer a dream or a picture of loss. And then you go on down the road you have to go together. Neighbors. This sort of continues the theme that's in Bhopal there. The bitterness. Since my son was killed, I've had 3 different friends come up to me and say, I'm really sorry. I apologize. Because when you went through that, I had no idea what you were going through. And now I'm in your shoes. Because they lost children. And they didn't understand it until they did. This is true, of course, of any suffering. You take alcoholism. George McGovern is writing a book about the death of his daughter who died in an alcoholic accident. You know, she was drunk and fell down in the snow and so forth. And my son died in an alcoholic accident. And so he's had an assistant calling me and talking about it because he likes these poems. And I haven't talked to him yet, but when I do, what she says to me is that he's blaming himself. And what I plan to say to him is, you know, if you're not an alcoholic, and of course he isn't, you can never know how impossible it is for anybody else to get at your problem. You're the only one who can help yourself if you're an addict. So if one really understands that, then maybe survivor's guilt will diminish. Anyway, this is called neighbors. Neighbors who pretend not to know. What kind of neighbors are those? Who sneak curious glances, who offer no word of goodwill. Some of them work, by the way, at Hallmark, famous for greeting us, yet not one word from them out of their mouths or etched in pastel. I pass them with children, their strollers or bikes slowed for riding beside. And as I say, the mother's sneak glances measure perhaps my dark envy, how I would wish theirs dead to bring my son back. And there is nothing to say, nothing to trade, for nothing, not a word in return for no neighborly word. Well, I'll end with this poem from Sam's book called In the Children's Library. Sam, retreating to find a room away from murmurous girls, loud whispers, music leaking from earphones, while mid-afternoon browsers of Sweetbriar lounge. I come to the bright room kept for children, wonderful books I did not read as a child. You got through some of them, and the novel you started in the 8th grade reflected your love of Tolkien and White and Farragon, and you loved Black Beauty at least as much as equestrian scholars here who cross the campus in boots, jodhpurs, cute little black jockey caps fastened at chin. I sit by the window open to leaves falling, now and then one upon the window ledge. Oak tables are small and the squat chairs strong, and I could have led you in 10 years ago while you lived and there was much hope ahead. Then I noticed a book propped, recommended. You come too, with Frost's darkest poems inside. Those you copied out on a cypress root and a birch slab. Come in to the dark and dust of snow, as if from the pine where you lie. I read them now, these poems you so loved, lived and died by, and see that the book has been stamped for grades 7, 8, and 9. as if an old man reading and seeking your guidance and frosts were robbing the cradle of wisdom. I read them for you, son, who taught me to weep, who taught me to say these prayers for the dark. Thank you. Well, someone said that a poem is a moment's monument, and I think that's probably true. So I've had a lot of moments to write monuments about. I've lived in several countries, so a lot of those places have been very inspiring. A couple of my books are about India, one's about Australia, one's about New Zealand. When you travel, things are very, very vivid. And so yes, I'd agree that you write about those moments that hit you very hard. And poets are more thin-skinned than other people, so they get hit harder and more often.
Well, how does one survive that?
I don't know. It's a mystery. It's a real mystery. But as I was saying to this workshop, it's really a life and death decision all the time, because you either have to be affirmative and get on with things, or give in to those negative voices and the negative influences that are around us, because goodness knows there are plenty. And they've destroyed a lot of poets. A lot of poets have self-destructed because they're so sensitive. Their sensitivity makes them vulnerable to the hazards, the addictions and the pressures.
But that is being sensitive. Is that also part of what helps us kind of look at something or an object and say, there's something that I have to write about it?
Right.
We just have to learn how to manage it better?
Yeah, it's not a conscious decision. The thing takes you. You don't take it. I mean, it grabs you. Henry James said, try to be one of those on whom nothing is lost. But of course you'd go crazy if you really followed that. But things jump up at you. It's very much, I think, like the work of a photographer. He sees something and he has to take a picture of it. It's not a conscious choice.
How much has travel, or how much has travel done for you, and would you suggest that to others in order for them to open up their world?
That's a real tough one, because I guess I'm kind of addicted to it. I'm going to Scotland and France coming up for residencies and places for writers. And so I guess I could say I'm an addict of travel. But I still have second thoughts about it. I might have been wiser just to stay at home. And when we went to India 10 years ago, I must say, we had two daughters with us. One was 19 and one was 15. The 19-year-old promptly fell in love with an Indian boy, wound up marrying him, so she loved India. And she still loves India, and she likes to go to India and stuff, so we have India in the family. The 15-year-old has never forgiven us for taking her to India. So we've got both sides of the coin right there in the family. So that's the ambivalence that I feel. I feel both sides of that. To some extent, why did we put ourselves through this? And on the other hand, wasn't it beautiful? And you feel both of those.
In your workshop, you were talking about what you thought poetry, what you think poetry is, and how you define a poem or poetry. And I wonder if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, poetry is just more condensed, elevated. I don't want to say elevated. It's just a more intense language and more tightly framed. Thomas McGrath, the late Thomas McGrath, who was a great poet, used to say, you can start the poetry now. And everybody knew what he meant. Everybody knew what not poetry was. And in a workshop like the one we just had, one of the things I asked them after they read their poems was, where does your voice change from poetry to just prose or explanation or analysis? And all of them knew. They knew right away. So it's a different kind of language. Houseman said poetry is what makes your whiskers stand up. So you know what it is. And about 20 people in the workshop read their poems, and I asked them which ones made you really feel something. And once more, they knew exactly. So poetry is that language which can bridge that gap between two people, whether it's over 2,000 years and a language barrier or just across a table. And you never know. I mean, as a poet yourself, Maria, you know that you can't predict it. You never know what will get through to somebody and what won't. The things that I think are sure things, I can't even get published. Maybe something that I wrote in a very offhand moment, somebody will come up to me that I've never met and say, that made me weep, or thank you for writing that, or something of that sort. So you never know. And sometimes, of course, you regret having this book, Sam's book, which was basically part of the grief work for my son's death 10 years ago. I wish I hadn't had to write. And yet that's the one that people write to me about and has brought me close to a lot of people because they've had similar losses. So you cannot predict, you can't prophesize, you can't prognosticate. And certainly as a teacher, you can't decide who's going to be terrific and who's going to be a deadbeat. You just can't do it.
No.
I know a lot of teachers who think they can't, but that's playing God, in my opinion.